JRPGs are in a better place now than they've ever been in terms of both critical reception and financial success. Once niche series that were struggling to get by have now taken their rightful spot into the mainstream gaming sphere, bringing in new fans into this incredible genre and showing that it's here to stay. But unfortunately, the road to get here has been paved with series that for various reasons are no longer with us in the modern day. Many beloved JRPGs unfortunately fall beneath the cracks, which is why today we'll be taking a look at some forgotten JRPG series that deserve a much needed second chance. Before we get started, feel free to let me know any series that you think deserve to be mentioned here in the comment section. And with all that out of the way, let's jump right into some JRPG series that I think deserve a second chance. Kicking off this video is a pretty out there entry, that being the Sakura Wars series. These games have a huge following in Japan, with the second title in particular being one of the best selling games on the Sega Saturn over there. Also, to further show its following, when the soft reboot released in Japan, it was just behind Pokemon Sword and Shield in second place on its opening week in sales. Now, Sega is known for sleeping on most of its JRPG IPs among most of its IPs in general, but there was a time where Sakura Wars was leading its genre and was a massive success. We might never have saw it here in the West, especially when you consider how the first game that ever made its way overseas was the worst selling in its series with Sakura Wars 5. But in Japan, Sakura Wars was a big deal. Not only success wise, but out of the games I played in this series, they all have great feel good stories and it's the closest the JRPGs ever felt towards feeling like you're playing an actual anime. Each chapter is instead referred to as an episode and goes over the arcs of the main heroines alongside fighting to save the world. The older games even had anime cutscenes. As someone who likes to be subjective when it comes to gaming, don't dismiss Sakura Wars based solely on its dating sim premise. Despite having aspects in common with more niche genres, first and foremost, this series is a mecha and has all that blinding contagious optimism that the style of anime is known for, all whilst tackling some pretty harsh subject matter but at the same time somehow being lighthearted about it all. The dating aspect isn't really a big part of these games if you've actually played them, but what's here is tasteful and none of the writing comes at the cost of any tropes or cliches typically associated with the genre. Gameplay wise, outside of visual novel interactions with the characters, Sakura Wars is a strategy RPG and is fairly casual friendly to pick up, especially with the reboot opting for a more hack and slash style approach. I honestly can't preach this series praises enough, and I definitely feel like it's worth giving a shot if you're a fan of the genre and are looking for something on the feel good side of things. Also, if we ever see this series get its much deserved revival, I hope it also comes alongside official localizations for Sakura Wars 1 through 4 in the West. It's criminal with how little Sega has pushed this series in the West, but hopefully with how they've been reviving their long dormant IPs we might see this one return. I'm definitely more hopeful on this one compared to other titles on this list given its rich history. Moving on to some classic Squaresoft titles, up next we have the Parasite Eve series. We've looked at these games quite a bit on this channel, but that's due to the fact that this series still stands out as much today as it did back in 1998. Ditching the more fantastical setting that this genre is known for, Parasite Eve takes place in a modern day New York, and features police officers and investigators as you try to solve this strange epidemic of human combustions being caused by the main antagonist. Parasite Eve was Squaresoft's first M-rated game and takes inspiration from horror classics with its more isolated atmosphere and dark colour palette. Topping off this game's prestige is the fact that it features character designs by Tetsuya Nomura and a soundtrack composed by none other than Yoko Shimomura. The battle theme in particular is a favourite of mine. Parasite Eve sold well and even spawned a sequel, and then later on in 2010 a PSP installment with the confusing title The Third Birthday came out and was a pretty controversial release among fans. Unfortunately, due to poor sales, which I'm pretty sure has to do with that title, the series faded off into obscurity after once being a huge pillar of the PlayStation 1's library. It is now no longer recognisable by the mainstream gaming audience. With no remaster on modern systems in sight, I'm very doubtful that these games will ever see the light of day again. Regardless, we can only stay hopeful that Square might take a look back at its much neglected older IPs and hopefully give Parasite Eve a second chance. We're still sticking with Squaresoft and a little bit of Square Enix for our next series, that being the Valkyrie Profile games. The first two titles in particular are some of my all-time favourites, with Sumeria probably being the best JRPG of all time in my opinion. Anyway, this entry is a little more controversial since there is an argument to be made here that with 2022's Valkyrie Elysium that there was an attempt at a series revival. But as someone who has played that game, let me just say outside of the use of the series name, it shares next to nothing in common with the Valkyrie profile brand itself. It's completely separate from the series' lore, gameplay and style. It's not even a reboot in some ways since it has so little to do with the original source material. Now, this isn't a Valkyrie Elysium rant section. Gameplay wise, what's here is alright, but it's nothing when compared to what came before it. And it's 100% just using its name to appeal to fans of the series. The original two entries are insanely difficult, but the incredible sprites of the first game and the outstanding world and story of the second show that this series still has potential for another installment set in its world. Also, I know that there was a DS game that released later on, but I'm so scared to try it since I've heard of how difficult it is. Hopefully someday I'll come around to it, but I'm saving it for when I feel brave enough. Anyway, moving on. From one Valkyrie to another, next up we have another JRPG series by Sega with Valkyria Chronicles. Back when these games first came out, and even today to some degree, the art style really looked next level with its shell-shaded anime storybook inspired visuals. Similar to Sakura Wars, it's a strategy game, but unlike something like Fire Emblem, it takes place in a more realism-inspired world, with it loosely taking place in Europe and featuring tanks and other kinds of heavy artillery. In some ways, I actually prefer Valkyria Chronicles over Fire Emblem. Nothing ever feels overwhelming, and compared to those older Fire Emblem games, this is way less punishing and frustrating. This series was on fire back when it released on the PlayStation 3, spanning multiple sequels, side games, alongside its own anime series. But after its fourth installment back in 2018, it seems to have fallen off into obscurity. This one's a bit more complicated than previous titles since its latest release sold very well with over 1 million copies being reached worldwide. And it also had great review scores, but for whatever reason it's not managed to make a modern day appearance. I'm more or less gonna chalk this towards Sega just sleeping on this series than any other factor. But as a result of its strange cutoff, I think it's only a matter of time until we see the return of this one. Especially after the fans of strategy RPGs have made it very clear that this subgenre still has a strong fanbase with the success of Unicorn Overlord. Also, Fire Emblem could really use with a healthy competition. Now, at number 5, we're going to be combining two series into one since they both came out around the same time and were made by the same developers. Before the monumental success of Xenoblade, Monolith Soft gave us Baten Kaitos and Xenosaga. Starting off with Baten Kaitos, this one feels the most shafted. Releasing on the Nintendo GameCube and eventually spanning a prequel on the same system, Baten Kaitos is a JRPG series truly unlike any other. It's mainly known for its unique card-based battle system which is easy to pick up but hard to master. Where it stood out for me personally however is with its incredible story. It's a shame this one isn't more mainstream since the way it plays with the fourth wall by directly addressing the player really puts it into a masterpiece of storytelling in my opinion. It really showcased just what the interactive media of video games were capable of in terms of telling a story that you could only do through this unique format of the player directly interacting with the world. Small tangent aside, a few years later, Baten Kaitos Origin released, and despite it having in my opinion a much weaker story, and having its cast only limited to 3 party members, it was 2 steps forward and about 5 steps back in terms of overall quality. The battle system is much more refined here, but where it tanks is definitely with its weaker story and overall pacing, with you mostly exploring the same world as the previous game with barely any changes. After Origins there was a cancelled DS game which would have been the perfect system with its dual screens for the cards, however it was sadly not meant to be. We did however get a pretty lackluster remaster back in 2023 which axed the English dub and features some horrendous input lag and stuttering, but outside of that it seems that the series is mostly dead. Due to having a small but dedicated fanbase and the fact that Bandai Namco owns the license instead of the original developers Monolith Soft, I doubt we'll ever see this series again. The same thing can also be said about Xenosaga, except that series doesn't even have the luxury of a lackluster remaster and is instead only really being kept alive thanks to fans and through emulation. Without going on a tangent, the Blade games seem to be taking more and more DNA from the Saga titles with each entry. But unfortunately, this beloved series has never seen as much as a re-release since the original trilogy came out, only ever appearing in other titles. Baten Kaitos and Xenosaga, despite being a financial disaster, are critically some of the best games out there and hold up incredibly well to this day. There's a reason that so many fans of this genre sing the praises of Monolith Soft to begin with, and it's for efforts like this and always pushing for art that has always made them so well respected to begin with. For our final series on this list, we're ending it with a strong one, ladies and gentlemen, Grandia. It's baffling how these games sank into obscurity. The first title in particular is still very much well known among die-hard fans of the genre. It came out of nowhere and rivaled giants like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, opting for a much more vibrant and colourful world. I'm not gonna lie here, both Grandia 1 and 2 have brought me to tears many times, be it through its amazing character-focused stories or out of this world soundtrack. We all know that crying meme during the credits with the text "I get it now." That was me when finishing Grandia 2, hands down one of the best endings to any piece of media. The best singular word to describe these games in a nutshell is adventure. You go on this grand journey and by the end of it, it really feels like you've taken it all in and witnessed something truly special. Fanboying aside, despite not playing it, I think a big reason why we never saw this series again was with its controversial third entry. I've only ever heard negative discussions against it, and just one look at any material from Grandia 3 shows a big departure from the look and feel of the previous two games. The developers' game arts are surprisingly still around, but their only recent releases have been remasters of Grandia 1 and 2 on modern systems, and they're likely behind the ports of Lunar 1 and 2 which released next month, with them being the original developers behind those titles. Chalk it up to low sales, or how a series like Grandia might not be able to exist with the modern state of gaming, having budgets on average in the millions. Compare that to the 90s where smaller budget games were allowed to exist, but I'm at least grateful that these titles are on modern systems and can be discovered by new fans, unlike a lot of other series on this list. Despite fan outcries on social media, many beloved and dormant JRPG series remain buried in the modern day for various reasons, most of which we may never truly know. Also, a post-video disclaimer, but as just one person, I've definitely not played every JRPG series out there, so if there's any that I've likely missed that you want to see make a return, let me know in the comments section, I'm curious. Also, any feedback on this video would be appreciated. Thank you so much for watching and I hope you have a nice rest of your day.